So in the next 10 minutes, I would like to introduce to you the GEO-TREES project. GEO-TREES stands for Forest Biomass Reference System from Tree by Tree Inventory Data. And now if I go a bit back and touch on the challenges and rationale that were behind this project, I need to go a few years back, 2015. Space agencies started to build satellites that were dedicated to measuring forest biomass, or specifically looking at forest structure. So we had on the NASA side, the JEDI LiDAR mission that were measuring tree height. The Chinese agency launched the TECHIS mission in 22, and last year both NASA and ESA launched two dedicated satellites. So ESA launched the Biomass mission, and NASA the NISA mission. So we enter a sort of golden age, or we have entered a sort of golden age of forest satellite EO, and this stands at the root of the GEO-TREES project. Now, all these missions have one thing in common. They try to measure biomass to estimate the carbon that is stored in our global forests. Now, this is a very important information. So the forests sit basically at the center of our CO2 cycle. So if we look at the classical carbon cycle type of representations, you split the carbon cycle in sources and sinks. On the left-hand side, you have the sources. On the right-hand side, you have the sinks. We know on the source side that 90% of the carbon that we emit comes from anthropogenic sources, so human fossil fuel burning. But there's also an important component, so about 10% that comes from nature. This changing forests into agricultural land. So we have heard about land degradation. So this is one component of that. Deforestation, conversion to agricultural land. Now, all this carbon has to go somewhere. It goes into three sinks. So one in the atmosphere. So nearly half of this carbon goes in the atmosphere and stays there, leads to global warming and to all the negative effect you read every day in the news. And then there's two components that can also absorb carbon. So one is the oceans. Ocean can absorb large amounts of carbon, but it has negative side effects. So it leads to ocean acidification, for example, that affects the livestock in the ocean. So the third component, and that's the only natural way to store the carbon or to take out carbon from the atmosphere in a natural way, are forests. So vegetation growing absorbs enormous amounts of carbon. Now, if we look at this graph, you see in red, in blue is the gigatons of carbon per year that are going into each of these sources and sinks. And I've also shown here let me activate my laser pointer. You also see in red the uncertainties, and you see these two forest components, the land components, have the largest uncertainty. And this is something the scientists want to fix. Now, if you do the quick calculation of these numbers, you will also realize that these numbers do not add up. So there is a bias or a gap between the sources and sinks that we cannot explain so far. So we miss some important processes that we would like to better understand. So to all this, these satellite missions will contribute. So it's an important science question. But it's not only important in terms of science, it also has an economic impact or a societal impact. The forest carbon has become a billion-dollar market. And I mean, you all feel this every day. If you take a flight, people ask you to compensate your flight, for example, by investing into reforestation measures or in carbon sequestration measures. So there's all sort of mechanisms to avoid or to support countries to invest into carbon neutrality, into taking up carbon. We estimate that the value the value actually today of high quality forest credits is between $25 and $50 per ton of carbon. So last year, the total market value about $1 billion, and this is predicted to grow to $5 to $35 billion. Of course, there's a large uncertainty in these numbers, but these are actually conservative estimates that are published by major investment banks, for example. Now, what is the challenge or the rationale where GEO-TREES comes in, or where the collection of ground-based measurements come in? So, I mean, basically, I said at the beginning, we live in a golden age. We have all these satellite tools. We have a demand. We have a scientific question. We have a societal question that we can address. But we have to realize that none of these satellites measure biomass directly. We measure some sort, or we estimate some sort of forest structure proxies. So we estimate forest height. We can estimate forest volume from these sensors. But then from this, we have to infer biomass, and from this biomass estimates, we have to infer carbon. So there's a lot of assumptions in these models, and we actually don't really know what we are measuring. So we need this, or we need ground-based observations, ground measurements to anchor our Earth observation products to reality. And without this ground truth, there's no precision in our measurements, there's no credibility and no trust, and people, will not put billion-dollar investments based on some Earth observation data that is not really validated. So we must ensure that we have access to long-term monitoring sites that are sustainably staffed and that are sustainably funded, because this is often forgotten. There's a lot of money flowing into Earth observation sector, into building satellites, but we often neglect the people who are doing the hard work on the ground and to also fund those, which we need to give sense to our satellite products. And this is something we would like to address with GEO-TREES. Now, what are the main services we want to establish? So first of all, we want to measure forest structure on ground. So this should be based on recurrent site-based measurements of key forest structure parameters, and it should follow a FAIR principle. So these measurements exist, they've been taken in the past, but a lot of these measurements are not openly available. They are also not stored in a way that we can easily access them and we can use them in Earth observation. For example, a lot of these plots that are measured on the ground don't have geographic coordinates. So for Earth observation, they're pretty much not usable. We not only would like to measure these quantities, we also want to connect to the local communities. So what we observe very often is that Earth observation expertise is a lot of focused in the Northern Hemisphere by engineers working for the European Space Agency or for JAXA or for NASA or whatever. But the ecological knowledge is in the south with ecologists working in the field. So we would like to combine these two communities to really benefit both sides on both ends. For doing that, we need an equitable and sustainable funding mechanisms. So these people working in the tropical countries mainly, they don't have the same systematic funding processes or mechanisms that we have. And of course, we have to support their work that they can really deliver us this high quality data. And we should not forget that this is really hard labor work. It's not like going to European forest, measuring a few trees here and there. It's challenging. It's a challenging environment. It's a dangerous environment very often. It's not easy. It requires a lot of skills. There's a lot of biodiversity in these forests. You have to determine all these tree species of the trees. So you have to really know what you're doing. Now, the scale we want to, at which we would like to do this. So we are with GEO-TREES in this first phase, we are aiming at the pantropics. So this is where we have least information available and where we have the worst working situations. And in the pantropics, we would like to establish 100 reference sites where we measure these forest structural parameters with very high accuracy. And we want to complement these 100 sites with about 200 complementary lighter sites that are where we see an opportunity to collect additional data. So the technologies we are using or what we want to measure, well, it's very much based on the traditional way. So the core truth is people taking a tape and measuring the structure of a tree. So they measure the diameter of a tree, they measure the tree height and the tree species. And from these three measurements, they can estimate how much biomass is stored in the tree and how much carbon is stored in this tree. So this is the core truth. And we do this for 10 1 hectare plots. 1 hectare is 100 by 100 meter resolution. So this is about the scale you can measure from space. So we have something comparable. But we also want to combine these traditional ways, these gold standards, with new technologies. So we try to build a three-dimensional digital twin of the forest environment. So for 3 1 hectare plots, we take ground-based LiDAR sensors and we measure all the trees and reconstruct the trees in 3D. And then the last measurement type we want to apply is airborne laser scanning. So having 10 points in the field is a lot of work, is also very costly. But of course, it's difficult to compare 10 points to a satellite image. So to have this landscape scale dynamics, the landscape information, we apply airborne laser scanning. And these two measurement types is really the new technology we bring into the forest sensors, forest measuration process in the tropical countries. This comes with a huge cost. I mean, each of these sites or each of these super sites where we collect this data is about 400,000 euros or $400,000. If we aim at 100 sites, this is about 50 million plus these 210 extra sites. So the whole program will consume about 100 million if we really reach our goals. Where are we today? Today we have established 50, to be precise, 49 sites across the tropics. So all these yellow diamonds you see here are sites where we're currently conducting measurements. So we're just finishing collecting these data sets. For some of these sites, for I think about 10 sites, we have actually finished it and we're currently processing the data and make that data available, or will ingest the data into our data portal so that people can access it. And then we have another 13 sites where we're currently setting up contracts with site partners to set up these forest sites. All this data that is collected will be openly and free available. So we really want to follow a fair data access with this initiative. Now, when we talk about the engagement on the key partnerships, I think it's important to note that one of the principles that is behind GEO-TREES is collaboration with our partners in the tropical countries. So for each of these sites, we try to identify a local group that is active in the field and that is locally active, and we try to support them financially to make this data or collect this data that we require to set up GEO-TREES. And we have set up collaborations with about 80 groups in the tropical countries. So each of these groups is financially supported by GEO-TREES to make this data collection. Then we have a group of supporting partners. So these are the main partners providing the financial support to collect this data. And then we have a smaller group as a network partner. So these are partners that collect all this data and do the processing of the data, the quality control of the data, and make sure that all the data is available in a consistent format, consistently processed with the same assumptions, so that we can really work with this globally. Also very important for engagement key partnership is, of course, one thing is to pay people to go in the forest and make these measurements, but that's, I think, not the complete picture. It's also important for us to transfer the knowledge and to build the capacity in these countries to do these measurements themselves. So we don't want to bring in people from Europe, from North America to take these measurements and then go back to Europe and leave everything behind. We really want these people to take up the technologies and use it by themselves. So we organized an annual GEO-TREES forum where we bring all these groups together. There was one in Washington 24, the last year was in Paris, and this year we are organizing one in fall in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. We also organized technical workshops. So we had last year a technical workshop in Chiang Mai where we trained forest ecologists in the use of terrestrial laser scanning. We had just last week a workshop in Panama where we were meeting with a group, mainly young people here, to set up the processing pipelines and the processors to go from the individual 3x3 measurements to really the carbon estimates that we can use later on to validate our Earth observation products. We also set up a postdoc fellowship program. So we have at the moment 3 postdocs supporting the program, and we have a research grant program where site PIs can apply with specific research questions for a limited time, 3 months, 6 months, relevant for their site, where we support them also financially. Now, on the impact and the sustainability, I think the impact is we will deliver free and open high quality forest structure data to validate Earth observation data, and this is shared in a fair way. So we really want to provide data that can be used in science, that is reproducible, that is accessible, that has geolocation information, so we can really make use that is processed in a consistent way globally. So you don't have to go to the individual PI, but you have one access point where you can access this data. Very important for us is that the equitable collaboration with the local ecologists. So we build on existing teams or we specifically looked for teams that are working in these countries, and we support them in their work, because this is for us the only way how we can support a sustainable process and a true partnership with these countries. And finally, the third important pillar is this building the capacity through collaboration, training, and technology transfer, and to really try to build a community where we have not forest ecology sitting on one side and Earth observation people on the other side, but really bringing these people together to benefit from both ends. Now, when we talk about sustainability, okay, I mean, all this, of course, trends or supports sustainability, but at the end, it comes down to funding. Sustainability costs money, and this is the main challenge we face. And I guess not only us, but all the other projects as well. We have no government institutional funding. We don't have a funded secretariat, so we all do this on a voluntary basis. The main funding comes from philanthropic funds. So we got a very generous donation from the Bezos Earth Fund. We got one from the Moore Foundation that makes about 80% of the funding we had so far. And that basically brings us through the next 2 years. But in total, this is only 30% of this 100 million figure that we need to sustainably fund GEO-TREES also in future. So there is a big gap, and this is one of the challenges, of course, that we face to keep this sustainable and also long-term for the future. And with this, I'm at the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.